What if I was to tell you that you're actually living in a simulated reality? Now, not a simulated reality like you would see in Hollywood movies like The Matrix, or simulated realities like you would be used to in video games here in The Sims, or something similar. But it is of a like kind. It's a very complex reality, but we have discovered at this point through data, through information, this is not just something being pulled out of people's butts or woo-woo, but through actual cutting-edge science, we have discovered, and have actually known for quite a bit of time, that our reality operates similar to a simulation or a virtual reality and isn't the materialistic reality that so many of us have been brought up to believe that it is. And so in this video, we're going to be going over the simulated reality, how this operates, and more of what you can do in order to influence it, because in fact, this is good news. The materialistic viewpoint is kind of like the billiards ball viewpoint, where you're just kind of being struck and moved around by life, and there isn't much that you can do. However, from the view of the simulation and the simulation hypothesis and reality, you actually have more influence over the simulation, your own individual kind of reality tunnel within that, which actually allows you to change different things in your life if you do certain things, which we're going to go over in this video. And so let's go over a few different key concepts here that are going to help you to connect to this and understand this. And I definitely encourage you to explore this even more after this video, and I'll give you some resources you can take a look at in order to do that. So the first thing to recognize is to look at our reality in this kind of way, where there's actually what's called a subset that's a part of a much larger superset. So just think of there's this bigger thing and there's this thing that's smaller within the bigger thing that requires the bigger thing to operate. So you can think of this like a computer and a computer game. The game needs the computer to function. The computer is the system itself. The game is encoded to be able to be played within the computer, right? So we have a subset and a superset. Now, when it comes to our reality and how all of this operates, the superset and subset are two specific things. The subset is actually physical matter reality. So this physical world that's all around us, this virtual world, as we're calling it here, that's all physical and looks physical, isn't actually physical. It has the appearance of physical, and we'll get into that in a bit, how that operates, but it's actually a very small component of all of our reality. It is a subset of a much larger superset. Now, what is that superset? The superset is simply non-physical. This is everything else. Now, another name we could give the superset or non-physical is consciousness, because consciousness is primary. You could also say, some people will say energy, that everything is made up and comes from energy. Everything you look at is made up of what we call energy. We could call it consciousness. And in fact, if you were to look at any object in this room or any object around you, anything within the physical world under the right scientific instruments, you would see that they're actually vibrating, and they're made up of energy vibrating at different rates of vibration. The slower the rate of vibration, the more physical something appears. The higher the rate of vibration, the less physical it appears. For example, water has a higher vibration. It's still physical, but it has a slightly faster vibration. Gases have an even higher vibration. And when you get beyond that, you get to things that can't even be perceived in the physical world through the physical senses, right? So keep that in mind, that this subset equals our physical reality, and this superset is the non-physical. In fact, there is even a physicist, and we're going to play a clip real quick of him, named James Gates. And his research is very, very significant, because what James Gates discovered when looking at kind of the core elements of our reality, where he looked very, very deep to see like what are the base components of this reality, he actually found that it was comprised of binary code, ones and zeros, like you would have in a computer program. If you've ever heard of the saying, as above, so below, or as below, so above, I think this fits really nicely into that, because we have this simulated reality, and when we create our own simulated realities, via computers, or have our own things that we encode, we also use the same programming language as it seems our reality is made up of. So I'm going to play that clip really quick of him just explaining this very briefly, that he found computer code the more deeply he looked into the fabric of reality.
So you're saying as you dig deeper, you find computer code writ in the fabric of the cosmos.
Into the equations that we want to use to describe the cosmos, yes.
Computer code.
Computer code, strings of bits of ones and zeros.
It's not just sort of resembles computer code, you're saying it is computer code.
It's not even just is computer code, it's a special kind of computer code that was invented by a scientist named Claude Shannon in the 1940s.
So are you saying we are all just, there's some entity that programmed the universe and we're just expressions of their code?
So pretty cool stuff there. Now I want to go over reality and kind of what makes up this reality, like we're mentioning, the non-physical and the physical, the subset within the superset. So if our physical reality is the smaller subset, it must mean that our reality is actually mainly not physical like we've been led to believe. And in fact, if we were to look at it, for example, we could look at atoms, which are considered the building blocks of physical matter reality. Again, if you were to look at an atom with an instrument that lets you kind of see it at its depth, see deep into it at the smallest level, basically, you would actually discover that an atom is 99.999999%, get this, empty space / energy. And the rest of it, 0.501%, is what we consider physical matter reality. And so this isn't conjecture, this is a real thing where if you were to look, again, at atoms, at these elementary particles, these things that make up everything you see in your world, the physical world, if we go even deeper again, we will see that everything is consciousness energy at that deepest level. It's making up everything. It's all coming from that same place. But if we were to look at atoms, which again, we have learned and have been told that are the building blocks of the physical matter reality, we have since discovered that they are mainly made up, I mean, not just mainly, like so much so that this is basically statistically negligible to the point where you could almost dismiss it, right? But ultimately, basically all of it is empty space and energy at its core, right? And everything you see physically is made up of these atoms, right? And so these are the building blocks of our so-called physical world, and it's not even physical itself, mainly these building blocks. And so it points to this idea that yes, our reality is not as physical, not even close to as physical as we've been led to believe. In fact, this is why you'll hear scientists and other people in that field say such things as if you were to remove all of the empty space and energy from every single person on the planet, so 8 billion people or whatever it's at, you would get enough physical stuff. So this stuff that we consider physical from those 8 billion people, if you were to remove all the energy, you would get enough physical stuff to fit within a sugar cube. And so when it comes to the balance between what is physical and non-physical, it's almost as if the physical isn't even there. It's such a tiny, minute amount. And so one thing we have to recognize, and the way our reality operates, is the physical comes from something, and it comes from the non-physical. The subset comes from the superset. It is not the other way around. And this is going to be a very important point later when we go over how to apply this in a way where you can actually change things in your life. This is not just so you know information, this is so you can have practical things you can use to see changes, to have more of what you want in your life, right? So we have to come to the conclusion that the superset is what allows for the subset. Without the superset, there is no subset, right? And so the physical follows the non-physical. And this is an important one to keep in mind. We could also say it another way. The outer world, so the physical world, follows the inner world, which is represented by consciousness and what we're calling the superset here. So we could put it here. Outer follows inner. Again, that outer, the physical world, is this tiny percentage. The inner is this massive percentage. And so no wonder a lot of people are struggling to create the things they want in their life because they're focusing on this tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of what influences reality to the point where you're just not going to be able to do it that much without a lot of trouble or a lot of struggle or a lot of strife because you're trying to influence reality from the thing that makes up so little of reality instead of focusing on the thing that literally leads to this. the thing that allows the outer to come about, or the subset to exist and form in the ways it's going to form, right? So again, the conclusions we've come to with all this research now is that the universe is actually virtual. It's not this physical thing. It certainly creates the illusion of physicality. We live physical lives. It's not to be dismissed. There is clearly a point to the physical aspects of our life. But to believe that's all there is, or is even the main component of what we are, is just, even from a data standpoint now, something that just isn't true, or appears not true based on the data that we now have, people's experiences as well. We can throw in anecdotal stuff in there as well. But again, from actual science now and research, these are conclusions that are being drawn up, right? And so the Big Bang, we want to talk about really quickly, because ultimately it is, at least most scientists and researchers will agree, that there was in our very, very distant past this release of energy, right? This Big Bang that it's called, right? The Big Bang, however, does not fit or cannot fit into any really materialistic viewpoint of life being material. But it actually lines up perfectly with the virtual reality hypothesis, or the simulation hypothesis. Because any simulation, when you boot it up, starts from a zero state and has a Big Bang from the perspective of the game as it's booting up from that zero state. And in fact, I'm going to play another clip from a documentary I'm going to recommend you go watch if you want to go into this deeper, but where they explain how this actually works and how the virtual reality idea fits way more how our reality operates than, say, just materialism.
From the materialist view that our universe is all there is, as an objective, independent reality, the fact that the Big Bang came from nothing is very hard to explain. How could everything come from nothing? But if you look at the universe as a virtual construct, the Big Bang model works perfectly. Virtual worlds always begin with an information influx from a zero state, since they need to initially boot up. Every time a computer game starts up, a Big Bang occurs from the perspective of the game. From inside the virtual world itself, the creation always comes from nothing, because before it boots up, there is no space or time as defined by the rules of that virtual world.
So when we really look at it, with all of this, materialism really doesn't add up. And again, materialism, just to give you the definition here that we're working with, is the belief that reality is mainly physical, that we live physical lives. It's kind of Newtonian paradigm. Now, are there these physical laws of physics, things that Newton discovered and all this different stuff that absolutely influence our lives? Yes, but simply in a physical way. The physical that is only this much of our reality. Does that make it any less real? Does that mean this actually isn't big from our perspective? No, the physical world is still massive. It is still something that, again, you don't dismiss. But when we're looking at it from the basis of what is everything made up of, or what's really going on here, again, the main thing that's happening is this 99.9+% is non-physical or energy, right? So we don't dismiss, we don't go jumping off our banisters because like, oh, gravity's not real because the physical's, no, that's not what we're talking about. We're still in this realm, and in this virtual reality, there are still certain rules to the game in what we call physical reality. The point being is there are other rules to the game that kind of supersede or are beyond the physical rules that we're used to, that in fact allow for the physical rules to even be in place, for this physical world to even be in place. And when we start tapping into those rules, we start focusing in on this, it starts to influence our lives much more effectively and in a direction we want to go in this subset if we tap more into the superset. So one thing I want to go over here to help kind of illustrate this a little more is what's called the computer game analogy. Because since we know now that our reality is operating similar to a computer game. Again, don't get this twisted and think, oh, my life is like The Sims. It's not. Or it's like, World of Warcraft, which is the example we're going to go over in just a minute, or Mario, or whatever else. That's not what we're saying here. It is infinitely more complex than that, to something we can't grasp the complexities of. We just can look at certain things we have here, understand that it's of a like kind, but to a very, very different degree, right? So I think a lot of people resist this theory because it's like, you're saying I'm just in a game, and does that make it meaningless? Actually, I think it's the opposite. I think a lot from materialism, people kind of derive a lot of meaningless from that, like, oh, you're here and then you're gone, and that's it, right? Or it's just all physical, there's nothing beyond that, right? But ultimately, it's not like a game like you would know a game, right? It's similar components, but to a much more complex degree. So the computer game or video game analogy, we're going to get into something called the character versus the player. And what I'm going to do now is play you a clip from another video I've created on somewhere else that's going to explain this very well, and then meet you back here. Now, another great analogy to break it down even more that kind of shows how this actually works and how basically the virtual reality and the physical reality act with each other and what their place in all of this is what we just call the computer game analogy. Now, you have to understand that the computer game analogy goes like this, that the computer game is actually a subset of a superset. And so that's just to say, let's say you play Sims. Sims is a game that you can actually boot up but only use via a computer, right? So the computer is actually what we call the superset. The game is the subset. It is within the rule set of the computer, so to speak. So the game actually represents Newtonian paradigm of physical matter reality, and it is something that comes from something much larger, which in this case we can call the computer or the superset. Now, when it comes to our virtual reality or our game that we perceive as our physical everyday lives, the subset that is actually coming from the superset, which we're just labeling again as the computer, the greater computer system. Some of us call it field, source, but we actually can label it as consciousness. And so this physical reality has actually become born out of consciousness. And so consciousness is primary, and then this physical matter reality is simply a subset coming from that consciousness. Now stick with me here. So physical reality is the subset. You have the computer, that is the superset, and this is kind of the grander scheme of things. This is source, the field. And one way you can also look at it is consciousness is the one that's actually moving the joystick. If we look at it with another analogy, say World of Warcraft, the character on screen is the elf, but the player is the one actually moving the elf. But from the perspective of the elf, everything in that world seems real. The people that they interact with, the battles that they get in, the growth that they go through while they go through the game, all of that seems like the real thing, like what they are. But we know as we're watching that happen that the elf on screen isn't the true player. The true player is the one holding the joystick, making the decisions from off the screen, yet it's creating these certain events on screen. And one of the crucial ways in which we can influence our reality is to understand that the subset, the game, is actually coming from the superset. And so if we take our attention off the character, the elf on screen, which is just this physical reality, me moving around in just this physical body, and we put it more on the player, our consciousness. We can also call this our higher self. We can call this putting our attention on source. Again, we can call whatever we want to call it. But when we start taking our attention off the elf or the character and start putting more on the player, that's ultimately handling the joystick that's creating the actions of the character on screen or creating a lot of what's on the screen, then we start to have a little more influence over our lives and what actually shows up on screen. So the more that we connect to the player, not the elf on screen or this character that you believe is all you are, but we start to recognize that we are something beyond that, that we have something that is connected to this inner space, to this superset, to consciousness and energy, this thing that is connected to that 99.9+% that makes up reality. The more we connect to that and then bring those insights and awarenesses back into the character so you're more awake and aware as you're moving through this character, you're reconnecting to the player, you understand you're not just this physical thing randomly and mindlessly going through this physical game. The more you do that, the more you're going to be able to influence your reality in the ways that you see fit, in the ways that you want. In a way, it's like you're going to be able to program in what seems like cheat codes into the game to other people, not because they're actual cheat codes or things that you've tricked the system. They were always things that were available. Even things that are so-called supernatural are just things that are natural that a lot of us don't understand, so we call them supernatural because we can't explain them from the materialistic viewpoint, right? But it's going to almost appear that way because now you're coming from a higher rule set. You're starting to connect to the superset, the inner world, the consciousness that is creating and influencing the subset anyway. And when you're doing that and coming from higher principles, it can almost appear like cheat codes in the game. It can almost appear like supernatural phenomena where that person's just so incredibly lucky. All this good stuff happens to them. I don't know what it is. They just got the magic touch or whatever it is. When you learn to connect to the player more than the character and stop getting hooked into thinking you're only physical and only the character, that's when you start to influence the game, because again, you're connected to the thing that actually allows for the game to even be playing. You're now connected to the computer. You're now connected to the superset, to consciousness, to energy, rather than just physical matter reality, which again is so little of what all of our reality is actually made up of. You're basically becoming the programmer rather than the programmed. So let's go into this even more, because we need to recognize, how the physical and non-physical works a little bit more. And one thing to recognize with the physical is we have calculated the rules of the physical to a very precise degree. And that's a very useful thing. I mean, it's given us so much. It's given us flight. It's given us so many different inventions. We're not dismissing it. We're just looking at what is reality mainly made up of, and are we really as limited as the physical claims that we are? Now, one thing we have to recognize is that the physical operates on what's called a linear rule set. It's very much A plus B plus C, equals whatever, D, right? It's very linear. It's a very linear model. It's very kind of analytical and linear in this perspective. But you have to understand that the non-physical, which again is at 99 plus or 0.9 plus %, operates in a very non-linear way. Meaning it is not A plus B equals C. It'll be like A and then F and then Z and then G equals whatever, right? It's not going to happen in this linear way in which the mind works. It's going to happen in a non-linear way, and we're going to go over how you can utilize this to bring stuff in and work with these principles and laws. But this is why we need to learn the rules to the non-physical. You see, the non-physical is what's allowing or creating or attracting what's happening in your physical life. I guarantee you, if you learn the rules to the non-physical, that 99.9 plus %, you learn how to move on that plane. And I'm going to give you resources to show you how to do this. If you do that, you're going to see certain things reflected in your physical, because again, this comes from this. And what you do on one is going to influence the other. Meaning if you do certain things in the non-physical, there are certain things in the physical that have to start showing up that correspond to what you're doing. This is why, for example, if someone is in a non-physical sense, so let's say mentally and spiritually and these things that are non-physical, right, in their non-physical life, if they were to be incredibly negative, incredibly, let's say things like jealous and angry and guilty and shameful and prideful and all these kinds of things, they're going to find corresponding results in their physical world. And when you look at someone like that, typically you look at their life and it's a mess, or they're in quiet desperation, or they're not even close to living the way they want to live. Because there's going to be a corresponding effect if you're doing that in the non-physical, because it leads to the physical. It can't work any other way. It harmonizes on the physical, whatever you're doing in the non-physical. However, it works the other way around too. If you, in the inner world, are creating harmony and coherence and love, and you're thinking positively, and your mental and spiritual planes of your existence are very coherent from that non-physical part of yourself, which again influences the physical. Your physical then has to start reflecting that through the opportunities, people, events, experiences that you have, right? So we learn the rules of non-physical in that way because it influences our physical. If you want to earn more money, if you want to improve your health, if you want to improve your relationships, if you want to learn things that you came here to learn, if you want to grow and evolve as a person, then cultivating those non-physical aspects of yourself, connecting to the player more than the character, and then bringing those awarenesses into the character are going to help you do that. It's like they say when you meditate, and if you're not meditating or doing that inner work, that's a great way to start. But you ultimately don't just want to meditate, but you want to bring what you gain from that meditation into the rest of your day. Because if you meditate, you become the player for that 30 minutes or hour, or however long you meditate, and then you go right back into being immersed in the character and think you're just physical and in the game, then it's not going to have as much effect. But if you're the player and you keep tuning into the player throughout the day, even do kind of little things here to keep tuning in, stay present, stay aware, understanding I'm not just this character, I am this non-physical or spiritual being that's playing this character, right? When you do that, then you start to influence the game even more. So one thing I want to go over now is called the Lego factory analogy. We can add analogy at the end here. I might have spelled it wrong. But ultimately, this is going to show you a little more of how it operates in a non-linear fashion. So I want to give you an idea of how certain things will start to appear in your life in a non-linear fashion, and it will also give you an example of how you can, again, start using the rules from the non-physical, from this virtual perspective, in order to influence your life. And so what I want to give you right now is what we call the Lego factory analogy. And this is an idea we dive into deeply with our clients that go through our reality creation program, where we get them to essentially learn how to live in this simulation as like a master creator, how to absolutely influence it in their everyday lives in ways that they actually want, which is something you're able to do once you learn the rules to this game and you practice playing it, which we show them how to do. I'm going to give you this analogy that we dive deep in with them. And this is simply called the Lego factory analogy. So imagine that in your physical world, everything is like a Lego brick. It's physical stuff, right? So you have all these Lego bricks in your world. All the physical stuff in your life is a Lego brick. And all of these Lego bricks come from the Lego factory. Now, the Lego bricks in your life represent the physical. The Lego factory represents the non-physical. And so the way most people try and change their lives or interact with reality is if they want something, they start complaining about the Lego bricks already in their life, or they start trying to change those Lego bricks into something they're not. But once these Lego bricks come into your physical world, from the non-physical into the physical, they're here, they're not going anywhere, right? They're already physical stuff. But instead of trying to, again, be the character or elf kind of moving around with these Lego bricks, and again, you can get some things done by doing that, or trying to change them into something they're not, something else you want. What if we were able to go into the Lego factory itself and request new things? What if instead of resisting what's already here, the current Lego bricks, and fighting against them, what if we could, again, just go into the back door of the Lego factory, go up to one of the workers and request a new mold to be created in the Lego factory? And then after enough time, because there is a time delay between the non-physical to the physical, because we're under those rules in the physical, but after enough time, that mold would be created, and then the Lego bricks from that mold would then start to come through. And so what we show our students is that this is absolutely possible, and then we show them how to actually do it. And ultimately, it is when you start engaging with the non-physical aspect of the simulation, of reality, when you start going into more of the computer part, when you pause the elf on screen, or you get out of the character and you go more into the player, again, that you can start encoding different things into the game. Because do you think it's any harder for the computer to put one thing in the game or another thing in the game? No, it would just require a different code ultimately. And so life can bring you, again, from the non-physical into the physical, pretty much anything that you could desire. It might take, again, more time depending on what it is. And again, because we're under those rule sets of time in the physical, if you want something physically. Again, you can access other things instantaneously. You want to feel joy? Guess what? You actually have access to that pretty quickly. If you want to access other states of being, for example, love, I could just tell you to think of someone you absolutely love, and you can access that right now. Think of a pet that lights you up. Boom, you're accessing the emotion of love. But things in the physical, because they're under the Newtonian paradigm, do take a little bit of time. And so one crucial thing we want to do is to take our attention off the current physical circumstances and keep them attuned instead to our vision. So we put our attention on the vision, which is like going into the Lego factory, essentially handing that over to the workers, and they go, okay, we'll make those molds. It's going to take some time, but we'll make those molds. Again, time for it to come in the physical, and to stop getting hooked into whatever the circumstances are. Why? Because when you get hooked into the circumstances in the physical reality, which again comes from the non-physical, and you're making that more real than the non-physical, you're giving more attention to these things and simply recreating those things over and over and over again. Because now you're thinking about those things, the Lego factory is getting your order as you want more of these molds, and we'll give you more of the same. But if you instead give more attention to what it is you want in your life, to your vision, you give more attention to the things that you love, you're more grateful, I'm sure you've heard about that, you're appreciative, which makes you appreciate what you appreciates. Then suddenly you'll start getting different Lego bricks coming out of the factory because the computer is now putting different things in the game. So if you want to change your physical circumstances to something differently, you have to stop putting attention on the physical circumstances. And not in the sense of like you don't go about your day or whatever, but stop complaining about things that are in your physical. Because by giving your attention to it, it's like you're going into the factory, although at this point unconscious, handing over more blueprints of what you don't want, and they're like, okay, if you insist, giving you more of the same. If you go in, however, with your attention more on your vision, if you go in more with your attention on the levels of emotions you want to experience the equivalent of physically, then you're going to start getting different Lego bricks. Again, because this reality, physical reality, is subject to influence. What is your influence? It's your attention and it's your intention. Meaning your attention, what are you putting your attention on mainly in the physical? Intention, what are you putting your intention from an inner place on as well? If you continue to put your intention on things that you don't want, your attention on things that you don't want, and usually these play together, you will continue to produce things that you don't want. More of those same Lego bricks, which is just more of the same physical stuff, will start to come into your world. A great example of this, have you ever had a certain person in your life that you just really didn't like and you kept resisting them and you're like, you know what, I gotta get away from this person. I'm gonna move, I'm gonna leave this job or whatever else it is. And then you get to the next job or the next place and on cue, there is the exact same person just in a different body waiting for you. Yes, this happens all the time to people in relationships. This happens all the time to people when they switch jobs. This happened to me many, many times, where it happened 4 or 5 times that in different environments, I kept getting the same type of person. Why? Because I wasn't taking my attention off it. I wasn't focusing on the kind of person I wanted in my life. I kept complaining about the kind of person that was there. And so no matter where I went, I kept recreating and having this Lego brick come into my life, so to speak. Now, like mentioned earlier, I want to give you the documentary where you can dive deeper into this and find other resources that will help you. It's called The Simulation Hypothesis. It's about an hour long, and it's also very well done. Like, it's not one of those very cheap budget ones, or even if it is, they do a very good job. And this is going to give you even more of the history behind how we know that this data is more accurate, how even materialism came to be the predominant thought in schooling and kind of raising our youth, and that's why so many people believe it, even when it was known that this probably isn't the truth or base reality. So I highly recommend you go check that out if you want to look into this further on how the simulation hypothesis works and how this is influencing your life. And again, it's going to give you some more context to applying what we've gone over here. Now, one other thing I want to give you is some tools to be able to actually utilize what we've talked about today, because if it's virtual and you have influence over your reality, I've already given you some things to think about. But what are some actual practical things you can start to do that utilize this theory, utilize this hypothesis so that it starts to influence your life in a way that brings you results? And so what I'm going to do is lead you to this video next, where I give you essentially a formula and a way to do this with these ideas in mind that are going to allow you to connect to the player more often than not, to connect that non-physical part of yourself that creates the physical, so you're seeing a lot of changes in your life.